kick off. So welcome to our latest episode in the Digital Transformation Leader Series, part of the Digital Transformation Lab out of University College Cork, part of the business school. So we've had some fantastic guests on this series, and today is no different. We're absolutely delighted to welcome Sara Cuddy with us. Sara is based here in Ireland, part of the Digital Manufacturing Ireland setup. And I know we're going to ask Sara just maybe to say a few words about herself and maybe that entity as well, and maybe the function of that entity. Sara, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and Digital Manufacturing Ireland setup, Sara?
Yeah, sure. So I myself have worked in the HR area for all of my life, so to speak. Doing lots of different things. Most recently, I suppose, was through transformation, working on what that might look like within organizations, and everything that it entails, from looking at the HR technologies, the setup of your shared services, through to kind of what a new functional area might look like within the HR space. So I currently work in Digital Manufacturing Ireland. And so a little bit about DMI. DMI was launched by the Irish government in 2023. The mission really is to be an industry-led organisation that enables Irish-based manufacturers to access, to adopt and accelerate their digital transformation journeys. And so I suppose the vision really is to work with that Irish discrete manufacturing base and look at the forefront of digital transformation, and to ensure that Ireland is recognised internationally as being a vibrant, collaborative and competitive space as they deliver on the next generation of manufacturing.
Yeah, Sara, very interesting. So Tony, over to you.
Yeah, Sara, look, we've read the report. It's a lovely report. I love the focus human-centric, because, you know, to my mind, so much of transformation fails because actually the focus is on the digital and not the transformation. I'm interested in the genesis of the report and how you got to work with the likes of MIT on it.
Yeah, sure. I suppose it started very early on for us, as organizations were coming into our organization. We're based down in Limerick, a beautiful brand new building, fully autonomous line, lots of fun technologies, so lots bright and shiny things. And so we had a lot of people come through our door looking at those, very intrigued as to what that might look like within their organization. But it always very quickly came back to the people, and what that looked like with regards to implementation, and how, what the concern for the person at the center of that. And I suppose, as we all know, a lot of tech implementations have failed or do fail. I think, we're up on the 60 to 70%, depending on what report you read. So I suppose as we started looking at it then, we actually looked at changing our focus into it being very much about the technology and technology operations, your operations and supply chain, and then the people side. So then as we started thinking about what on the people side we could bring to the market, or what that would look like in supporting our clients, we wanted to really ground it in an actual report, to understand what the research was saying, but also how we could help. So that's how we started looking at our collaboration with MIT and IAAE. So it was all kind of quite organic. And so if you think of that pillar of Industry 5, you have your sustainability, resilience, and human centricity. We very much started to look at that and try to understand it. And really, there was very little research out there within that whole area of human centricity. So we began by very much defining it, or trying to define that based on what literature was out there, and Cuddy has that white paper there in the background. And so Again, we just started there, tried to level set with our industry colleagues. We're really grateful. We had 11 medtech manufacturing organizations in Ireland that joined us throughout this process, and it took about a year, and it was really quite invasive to them. You know, it was lots of interviews, lots of surveys, that type of thing, to really understand what was happening, and it was really to understand what's going well, what could go better within these organizations, and really to start to find what the cultural transformation would need in order for us to build on the adaptation or the adoption of technologies into the future, you know, based on that, putting the human at the center of that.
Yeah,
that was a long answer, Tony.
No, it's very interesting. Actually, I'm going to ask you a question, because I was intrigued by it. And before maybe we get to report, you know, you referred there to your site in Limerick, and I think I read that it's something like 12,000 square feet. That's really trying to show what the future might look like. If we were to go to that site, what would we be seeing at the moment, Sarah?
Yeah, so lots of different areas, but the first area, as you come in, you will see a fully autonomous line. So a line that has no people on it, and so the line showcases what that might look like into the future, including a warehousing section that is fully autonomous. So we have that, and that's really interesting for people to come in and see what pieces of that technology might work within their area. We also have our lab, which essentially walks you through each area of each area of your manufacturing process, through, you know, digital twins, what automation might look like, what it looks like on the supply chain side of things. We have lots of really clever people that work with us, you know, we have a lot of data scientists, a lot of people within the automation area, and essentially their role is to work with industry and our technologists, technology in organizations, to showcase what their technologies can do. And so we're kind of that person in the middle. We're not selling anything. We are agnostic to it all, but it's really to showcase what different technologies are out there, what they can do, and what they can do for industry. And again, it can be anything from an MES Lite to, you know, what that might look like, very in depth. And so I think that's the interesting piece for us. We don't work on, you know, here's all the bright and shinies, here's all the technologies. We're very much about the solution. So looking at each organization, who are very different and very much on their own journey through this process, and trying to build what the right solutions for them. And that can be different for everybody, right? And they may start in a different place as well. So I suppose you come in, you look at all of that technology, but it's really the core of the people that are there that actually make it the most powerful, because we all come from industry ourselves, and we understand the challenges, and importantly, our KPIs are based on the adoption and the implementation for those companies as well. So kind of going back to that the tech implementations failing, our role is to try and ensure that doesn't happen in those spaces.
We'll have to come down. We'll have to come visit you, Sarah, and do a roving report on your setup, because it sounds wonderful. Sarah, just so you mentioned, human-centered manufacturing, or human-centric. How did you define that?
Yeah, so essentially it places people at the center of the technology adoption. So HCM is a cultural transformation. It's not a change initiative. It's very much a cultural transformation, which aligns the enterprise strategy, your leadership values, and the technology to enable a data-driven, people-centered organization. So essentially, it's really about putting the person at that center of your technology. As you buy and implement new technologies, it's really about what will serve your employees. So as you're thinking about those technologies, how can you ensure that the person is at the center of it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does, because I mean, I suppose, in my experience, most employees, when they hear the organization talking about digital transformation and technologies,
Yeah,
they're thinking shorthand for redundancies and right sizing and all that sort of stuff. So,
exactly.
I suppose, it's grand saying, yeah, look, it's putting people at the center, but in practice, right, in practice, and you do call out some of the challenges that firms face. In
Yeah.
practice, how do you actually start to shift the culture to that?
I think it was really interesting for us when we started this journey. I think companies know that they need to do things differently, right? They've all probably had some misses themselves along the way with implementing technology, and so they know that there's more to understand, there's more to learn, and that in a lot of these organizations they're doing some really nice pieces of work, but it's actually how do you bring that all together. And so I suppose for us it was really trying to then attach it to some of those ROIs, right? So what is your return on investment if you're going to start looking at some of these? And the biggest and the most simplest one is around accelerating the adoption. So building a culture that is agile, that people are excited to look at the technologies, and I suppose quite simply it's looking at the WIFMs, right? So what's in it for me, for the employee. So you really need to focus on that. As you're thinking about any type of technology change, what does that mean for the employee at the center of that? Is it actually going to make their life easier? Is there, from a health and safety perspective, is it safer for them? So considering all of those things, I think will always help with the adoption of that. And I think if you think about the skills issues in the country today, people want to work within organizations that put them at the center, but also that are doing some cool things and that are working on newer technologies and that type of thing. And so I think all in all it'll bring all of those things together. But I do know, Tony, again, right, it is the softer side. It's not, it's not you're going to have a return on your investment of 50% or whatever it is, right? Because it is the soft side, but it is about the enablement of the technology adoption that you're trying to do by being part of this.
And just on the, I suppose a question that would strike me, Sarah, and this is maybe based on, I suppose, in and out of a lot of maybe manufacturing companies. We're very fortunate here in Ireland to have a lot of global companies with manufacturing units. I would probably suggest that in some, it doesn't strike me that the employees always have enough autonomy to know they're not given enough freedom, and that there's very strong controls over what they can't do in Ireland, but also even in particular sort of units within Ireland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, 100%. And if you think about taking that to the next level with regards to in a manufacturing environment, it is very much about getting out your product at the end of it, right? Making sure that there's safety, that there's quality, all of those things are really, really important. But there is also space for autonomy. And interestingly, as we looked at our 12 emergent themes, it kind of came out there quite strong, especially as we started looking at self-directed teams. And that's not new. It's definitely something that's been around for quite a long time. But there is an expectation for people to, and I suppose, especially with the modern workforce, if you think about that hierarchy of needs as well, that level 5 around self-actualization, it's very much at play there. They want to be able to have that self-fulfillment, and I think that's part of it. And so I do think that maybe focusing on those things, utilizing data, is kind of going to be powerful. And what I mean by that is that you're using and utilizing your data so that people can make the right decisions at the right time. And so bringing your data down to that level where you're actually empowering the decision making of that person, I think is going to be really interesting to see how that develops.
And do you think that there's evidence now that that is starting to emerge, Sarah, that we are seeing these global companies willing to give more autonomy to employees here, in Ireland or elsewhere, to actually make more decisions, make more meaningful decisions?
Yeah, I certainly see it. I think it's one area we will be setting up a collaboration group based on this study to start diving into these pieces even more. And one of the key areas that people are really interested in is that whole area of the frontline worker. And what does that look like into the future? A massive component of that is going to be about human-centered dashboarding, which is really interesting as well. And what we mean by that is around that decision making. So using your data in the right way so that you can actually enable that decision making. And so I think there's lots more work needed on that. And even if you think about how dashboarding is done right now, it is very much project based. It's probably a couple of people sitting in a corner figuring out what that looks like. And you have to think about all the tacit knowledge that goes into that as well. Even how do you interpret what those dashboards mean? And so kind of taking some of that out of it and making sure that the people that you are expecting to interpret those are actually part of it. It's part of the conversation body as well around design thinking, right? Bringing the right people and thinking about them and what they need within that, I think is going to be really interesting to see how project groups are even set up in the future, and making sure that you do have that cross-functional kind of thought, for lack of a better word, I think is going to be really important.
So, I mean, organizations operate at different levels. So let's say at the top level, they buy in, say, look, we need to digitally transform and change the culture and all those type of things. And then at the lower level of the organization, you got all the young digital natives who are wondering, well, why haven't we got digital twins and why haven't we got this, that, and the other? Huh? The piece in the middle, so people who've been working in this particular way for many years, they often struggle with, the executive are talking about something that I don't necessarily understand. And the young people on my team, they're chomping at the bit to get going. And I'm feeling very much at sea. How do organizations address that piece?
And I don't have all the answers certainly on that one. And I do think that there is going to be power in that conversation for sure. I think part of the study that we saw as well is just the expectations on that, the frontline manager is huge. They're expected to not only be able to translate the strategy and how you work, but also understand the needs of their teams and then work within across functions, right? If you think about the transformation of all of the functional groups as well, their HR people, their finance people, their IT, right? So they have a lot of specialisms that are expected within them on them as well. So I suppose from that perspective, I think we really need to focus on our frontline managers for sure as a starting point. I think secondly, there really has to be a concerted effort with regards to the change management and building change agility within organizations as well. And I mean that throughout the organization. So how are organizations making sure that they do have change champions within their organization, that people that may not be as comfortable with technology might have a buddy that's, two rows up from him that they can go and ask a question to without feeling, I don't know, like, less than or whatever that is.
Inadequate.
Right? Yeah, right. So you need to make sure that you are, you're sensitive to that as well, and that you are thinking about everybody and where they are on their journey, because everybody is at a different place. And I think we need to maybe look at that as well, and make sure that we're, sensitive to people, but ensuring that we are working. And it doesn't have to be a huge big bang, right? It is about incrementally helping people to come along on this journey, and just building that agility into your organization.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's an interesting question from Tony. And I'd say that, and it isn't just younger people, but I think a lot of employees now aren't just intent on looking inside, but actually very much aware of the global picture, and also maybe challenging their own companies to be more environmentally sustainable, to be more ethical, and being activists actually in those changes. So again, for me, that seems to be the antithesis sometimes of the way some of these larger companies are set up, you know, and actually I think they're quite scared by that, you know. How's that all going to play out? And of course, this is also key to what you said earlier, Sarah, though Industry 5.0 is very much about that.
Yeah. I do think it comes back to understanding your employees as well. So you know, I think it's interesting to see organizations set up as they think about communication as well. A lot of times it's very much one way, and you're really not hearing that much from your employees. And so making sure that you do have spaces and places for people to have conversations, to bring up their ideas. And again, it is about that self-empowerment piece as well. Do they have the ability to work on cross-functional teams to maybe look at these areas or these things within their organization? I think that's where you know, if you think about engagement strategies within organizations as well, going after the heart and helping people kind of feel like they're doing something right within those areas that they're interested in, I think would be really really a powerful thing for organizations as well. I also think, and again, you'll see it in the study, we talk a little bit about intrinsic and extrinsic rewards, and making sure that you're rewarding the right behaviors for people as well. And so I suppose one of the examples we would use is even around the maintenance technicians within your organization. So our reward systems are set up kind of really to reward the behavior of getting the machine back up and running within a certain amount of time, and changing that to be more about looking at predictive maintenance and are you rewarding that behavior, I think is going to be an interesting one as well. But I don't think any organization has really gotten all of that right, Paddy, but I definitely think that we're getting there. It's really lovely to see the number of employee resource groups within organizations now, and how you know, people are really respectful of what's happening within those, and I think that just adds a lot of joy to our workplace as well.
You mentioned in the report that, you know, your manufacturing is on a journey. So when it started out and where it got to and where it needs to get to, where, you know, people are at the center, where on that continuum are we?
Yeah, I'd say every organization is at a different stepping stone within that as well. And even if you think about, I mean, we were lucky to work with medical device manufacturers, large international organizations, as well as some of our locally grown organizations as well. But if you think about our SMEs and our smaller organizations, where do they have the time and space to maybe think about some of these things as well? So I would say every organization is different, but I suppose the piece that we would encourage is that you don't need to be down that journey far before you start looking at these elements, because really with the cultural transformation component of it, what you're doing is building that agility in your organization for when the technology adoption is required. So I reverse that question for you, Tony, but I think every organization is on a different journey, and you know, I do think that we have a long way to go, depending on the industry as well, and every industry is different. But it's fun to see where companies are at as well and how they're doing.
Well, maybe I'll ask that question slightly different then. Is it inevitable that we need to get there, and do leaders actually buy into that?
Yes, I think they do absolutely buy into it. And I do think that there is also a realization that we need to do that. I mean, specifically for competitiveness in general. I think as we've talked to a lot of manufacturers, it is more about building capacity. And it's a lot less about reducing your number of people. And so they're trying to build capacity through their digital adoption, and become the type of manufacturer that gets all the new products or has some of those new products within their organization. So yeah, I think there's absolutely a realization there.
it was interesting actually. I think it was in the was it in the first even few pages of the maybe the slide deck or the report. I think there was and I try to remember, it was the executive summary, and I think it referred to the Irish government, and the Irish government's strategy. But it was interesting, the words, and I felt they grated a bit on me, because I think they're quite different to what Industry 5.0 is for me, but it referred to this idea of exploiting the opportunities of manufacturing. Now, a lot of people are starting to challenge that whole view about exploitation, about extraction. Even those words are very topical at the moment, Sarah, and I was just wondering, is that a bit at odds with what Industry 5.0 should be about, could be about? Or is the Irish government, I would say, adopting a very American style approach to Industry 5.0, even though it's a European concept?
Yeah, so I would say, Polly, that is it is interesting if you think about the language that is being used, and you are right. There probably is a little bit about that extracting the value and taking. But to us, we looked at reversing that, and we want to put the human at the center of that, and making sure that we're doing the right thing with technology through having the person at the center of it. If you look at the report, there is a piece on the competing values framework within there, I suppose that would be one of the most important frameworks that we've seen for characterizing and understanding organizational culture and leadership. And if you see how our emergent themes have mapped out over those, it actually is very much based on this clan and autocracy elements. So for us, it is more about, so if you think about the clan, it's that familial piece. So actually making sure that you are building an organization based on your people, based on what that clan within your organization looks like. And then the autocracy side is that entrepreneurial piece. And it is about making sure that you're doing the right thing through that experimental side of your organization. So I suppose for us, it isn't that, and that we have been able to show that it maps across those two top quadrants of our framework.
That's right, yeah. And this isn't I suppose saying what you should do or not do or whatever, but I think there is a European perspective on this, Sarah, that's actually very aligned actually with Industry 5.0. Like, so if you think Europe is where GDPR came from, Europe is now where AI ethics is really coming from. I think a European perspective on this could be really, really interesting. I think sometimes if you're engaging with US research institutions and companies that are by and large US based headquarters, you get quite a different perspective. Whereas I'd love to see that European perspective, which I think is a lot softer. I think it's talking a lot more to what you're saying now, and I think maybe that's one for the future.
Yeah, I like that idea, even about what is the language we're using and how do we actually interpret that. So yeah, no, I think that's good guidance.
So you mentioned the emerging teams, and we have read the report, and it is a great report. There was 12 of them, and they were kind of in 4 buckets: so imperatives, values, strategies, and practices.
Yeah.
So how did those 12 come about? And actually, why even did you go with those headings for the 4 buckets, if I call them that?
Yeah, so again, we wanted to base it on what we were seeing within industry, and we wanted to set it up in a way that organizations could look at this and say, okay, this applies to us. This is something we could do within this area. And so we wanted it to be something that was very practical, and we could do some practical implementations of these emergent themes. So I suppose it was based on our conversations with organizations as to what they were doing. We wanted to make sure that it was rooted in a lot of different areas. As you said, it is your imperatives, your values, your strategies, and your practices. So it's really getting into the layers of your organization, and trying to ensure that you're impacting across all of those areas. As I said before, that focus on your org capacity is hugely important. As we kind of started looking at some of those areas, well, within the practices, I think you'll see a lot in there around the individualized skills journey planning and role crafting. I think this speaks to a little bit about what Paddy had said earlier as well, around ensuring that people have part to play in that, and role crafting is kind of an interesting way of doing that as well. So making sure that that person has at the center of that has a role in figuring out what their role would look like into the future. And so I suppose we just wanted to make sure that they were as practical as possible, knowing that not every organization is going to be able to focus on those 12 themes. Some of those organizations are doing some really nice work within some of these themes already. So building their strategies, some tactical implementations of that. But then also there's kind of some longer term plays here as well, where we don't necessarily know exactly what that will look like. And so it needs more work, it needs more research. And to Paddy's point, maybe it is about looking at the language as well and thinking about what that might look like. For our organizations, you'll see that there's a section in there is around what leaders could do and what they could do differently as well. And there is there's probably more that leaders can do in order understanding things like systems thinking, the org change management, design thinking, what human preferences look like. How do they actually, and I suppose quite simply, build space within their organization as well to start thinking about the future and start thinking about what they can do. I suppose that was one of the pieces that we found really powerful throughout this journey, was what our organizations could learn from each other. So that whole power of collaboration was huge. And for them to have kind of that forum to maybe take a step back and then think about what their organization could be into the future, but then also listening to other organizations around what they're doing in this space and what might be a practical way for them to implement some of those things themselves. So it was, yeah, I suppose it was not to be too directive, but to give people a framework for which that they could do some of this work themselves.
Yeah. I love that concept of spaces, and I know I saw it referenced at a number of places in the report or the documentations there as well. And I think you're right. It's space in our own heads that we start making new sense of things. It's spaces for teams to start doing new things, and spaces for organization maybe to do new things, but also to collaborate. And I know also there was reference to centers of excellence.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about that initiative, Sarah? Because I think it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, so I had talked a little bit about how we're set up in our organization based on those three functions, but also we have set up a number of centers of excellence to ensure that everybody has the ability to, pop in and out of what we're doing within those spaces. And our first one was around visual cognitive manufacturing. So really looking in depth at what we could do within those technologies and how we could help organizations in that space. And so we have 79 organizations at the moment signed up to be part of that. And
Wow.
It's a really interesting space to be. We're actually going to be building a vision lab as well to actually help organizations bring some of that along. And then the second one, interestingly enough, is around human-centered manufacturing, or workforce transformation, as we're calling it now. And so I suppose the piece that was really interesting to hear from Donna, our MIT colleague, was how open Irish organizations were to that collaboration component and actually really trying to solve problems through this collaborative approach. So I suppose that the goal is to develop solutions for manufacturing through this collaborative process. And so we will be bringing those together here at the end of June, and to start really looking at particular areas within this space. And so, as I said earlier, we were going to focus on the frontline worker. We're going to focus on leadership and culture, as well as then looking at learning and skills and what needs to be done in that space. And so I suppose that's part of what we're doing. We're just signing companies up right now. We've gotten really great interest, and as I said, it's our way of ensuring that everybody has the ability to join and be part of the journey that we're trying to build, based on the framework that we have now.
And so, look, intuitively, this all makes loads of sense, right?
Yeah.
But you equally talk about, you know, the real world, where you
Yeah.
say, you know, companies have pressures, they have short-term goals, they have all sort of pressures on them. And transformation is not easy, as you know. Right? So how do you create the space, actually? You know, Paul was talking about space. How do you actually create the space and the momentum, actually, to make sure you can bring about the transformation, as opposed to maybe engage in an initiative and then, you know, 3 months later, you know, bow out? So how do we sustain this and make it real?
I think if you think about Irish organizations and how they embraced Lean Six Sigma, and that whole culture of lean, I think we need to maybe rethink that based on digital. And so making sure that and again, that was a journey. I think all of this is a journey. And so it is about starting small, maybe having a quick win or two within your organization, but then starting to build your change team throughout that organization, you know, maybe thinking about similar to how you would have done in your lean days, but actually starting to build that momentum in your organization, and start looking at those emergent themes, start looking at some of the things that you're doing really well. So a big piece of work for us was around that customer centricity, right? Our organizations were really good at putting their customer at the center, their pure customer, but they needed to maybe start thinking a little bit about putting their customer, as in their employee, also at the center as they started thinking. So again, it is just about a mindset set shift. It doesn't need to be huge, but actually just maybe adding a section for human centricity as you're thinking about bringing in a technology. Well, actually, what's that going to do for our employees? Is that going to actually help them? Is it not going to help? How much is it going to help? All of those types of things. I think there's simple and easy ways to start doing, but again, it's a journey. It's not a big bang. It's not going to happen that way. And you need to maybe think about your 5 to 10 year plan and kind of map over that period. And I think that's probably the only way organizations can do it.
Mm. And I'm interested in something that was also in the report. So I'd worked in manufacturing in the UK. I'd worked with companies here in Ireland. There is something different about the Irish psyche, or the Irish, I don't know what it is, and I think you referred to that as well, Sarah. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so we referred it as a clan culture, and it's almost like that. Yeah, it's almost like that metal piece that we have within Ireland. That's it's just kind of unique to us. It is very much about, I suppose, how we were brought up. It is very much about that familial component within those organizations, making sure that people are okay, that their well-being is taken care of, that you think about people as a whole person, not just your employee sitting on the line. And yeah, I suppose that was an interesting piece to see from Donna as well, with regards to her reaction to that, and how Irish manufacturers, you know, they knew a lot of their employees. It was it's just, I think that for us, we are in a good place within Ireland to actually go through this digital adoption because of the culture that we've already created.
Yeah, and I'd also have seen with Irish subsidiaries of global companies here, that they can do things here that the headquarters really struggle to do, whether they're in the States or elsewhere. And we've these lighthouse projects that really things can happen here as well. And I think there is something really beneficial about an Irish psyche, mindset, etc., about bringing together things that seem to be opposites and that seem to be contradictory, and being able to work with them here as well, Sarah.
that was really it was really an aha for us as we worked with these manufacturers as well, just to see the potential that they have within their organizations. There was, I think it was 60% was the lowest and higher with regards to their frontline workers that had at least a degree. And if you just think of the power that's within that, I think there's so much more potential, untapped potential, where we really need to start looking at skills utilization within organizations as well. It's not necessarily always about upskilling you need to look at, well, actually, what skills do people already have, and how are you using them correctly? How are how are we harnessing that for the betterment of the organization as well, and also of the human, of the person, right? They want to be able to use their different skill sets. They're not, you come in, if you think about that functionally, you come in as a quality engineer, but actually maybe you have an engineering degree, but you're kind of put in this box. And so it is really about maybe thinking a little bit differently as you're working on projects within an organization.
And so in that space, you have a section on what leaders should do differently.
Yeah.
So maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I think I probably have mentioned quite a lot of areas there already through, maybe leaders taking a step back and understanding the organizational context a little bit more, understanding the human within that. I think that's really important. I think there's certainly a piece where, and again, right, we're not necessarily telling leaders what to do. We just want them to maybe think about things as well, and giving them ensuring that people are given that time and space, as we've already talked about, to maybe think about things a little bit differently, and building their strategy for maybe what that looks like over the number of years. How they use digital technologies, how are they using data to empower their employees, and maybe thinking about that a little bit differently, right? So it's not necessarily about the data to just get numbers. It's about how they're actually empowering their teams to give them the right information. Yeah, so I don't know. I think I've touched on a number of different areas as well.
Well, one you haven't touched on, you referenced specifically, is push tolerance for failure philosophy into team level. So,
yes,
because it kind of sounds like an oxymoron, but maybe explain what was meant by that.
Yeah, I think in order to really look at innovative organizations, it is about them having the ability to fail and get up and move on and try again. And so it is, and that was a really interesting one to talk to our industry leaders about, right? Because there isn't a tolerance necessarily within organizations right now, especially within a manufacturing environment, because of what they do and the expectations within there. But there was some really interesting little ideas within that as well, in that, that as they're thinking about new technologies, that they have a room set up where people can go in and they can, play around with the technologies, or that you have a couple of pilot projects that are, pie in the sky type things, but you're giving people the time and space in order to do that. And again, there is going to be failures based on those things, but there could be some really powerful wins within that as well. And so I suppose that's what we mean. It doesn't necessarily mean a whole scale change, but it very much can be done in a practical way within your organizations, and could lead to some massive changes for you as an organization.
Mm.
Thank you for that.
And I think, look, as a mechanical engineer myself, we don't like failure, and actually we're trained, to ensure there's no failure, and that's quite a culture shift. And I think you're right, Sarah. Like, I think failure is important, but how you fail is even more important, though, that you reduce the risk of that failure, and you can take a lot of value from failure, whereas if sometimes the way we do some of these projects are, if it fails, we've really, really failed. It's very high stakes, and I think there's ways around that. Just a comment, Sarah. I don't know. Do you have a comment about it as well? As I know, we were talking about beforehand, the figures sort of from the Irish manufacturer at the moment are soft, to put it mildly. There's a lot of maybe concern in the last month, particularly that those figures seem to be getting softer, but at the same time, the employment levels are not dropping, which I always think is a great sign that maybe now we've companies starting to invest in the future, even though the figures are now. But traditionally, when the figures get soft, people double down on the stuff they used to do before rather than the stuff they should be doing going forward. Any views on that from your own perspective?
Yeah, and I think that's natural, right? If you think about it, once things get hard and difficult, you kind of revert back to what you've done before. But I do think that, with some of those numbers and some of those things happening, it is a bit cyclical, right? So they kind of happen in waves, and then we move on. So I think it's about organizations sticking to their strategy, sticking to their goals, and just working to get there, making sure that obviously they're working on their KPIs, they're working towards those, but they're also incrementally building on where they need to get to. Yeah, that's all.
Sarah, I'm curious, are organizations just bamboozled by just the extent of technology innovation? And you can throw AI in now, since you've done the report, everyone's talking about AI. Is it too much coming at them? And is that a struggle in terms of trying to figure out, well, where do we need to go?
Yes, we very much see that. I would say, I think organizations come to us, and it is really about, I know there's a lot to do, but I don't know where to start. And so I suppose we've been working with organizations through that process, helping them to build their strategies, align it to where they need to go and their goals within their organization as well. And building that incremental change that they need. But absolutely, I suppose organizations, some of them are already on an amazing journey. And I think that a lot of other organizations can get a lot of inspiration from that as well. So I do think that ensuring that collaboration continues and that we are looking at those best practices within organizations are going to be key as well. And that if you think about the technologies that are out there, that they are working to solution for what the issues are, as opposed to, with those technology companies, being kind of insular to say, okay, well, here's our brand new technology, but actually what's that going to solve for anyone? So really that they're working on challenges and solutions that are actually going to improve the manufacturing environment, I think is going to be key too.
Yeah. And of course, look, the best way of reducing risk is collaboration. And I think that's why what you're doing is so important, Sarah, bringing companies together, actually maybe even sandboxing technologies in your own center. I think all those things are really, really valuable. Just, I'm intrigued by how do you feel people have reacted to the report? What have been those initial reactions? Is it that, yeah, that's nice? But what do we do next? Or I'll remember that, but actually I'm back to doing the usual stuff. Or do you think we are actually on the cusp of, because you are saying it's a culture transformation, are we on the cusp of a culture transformation within manufacturing?
Yeah, I think so. I suppose the 11 organizations that we have been working with, part of the report out for them was that we would do an individualized review of their organization, and help them to kind of come up with a plan for what that looked like for them, and where they maybe have some opportunities to improve, but also where they're doing really well and they should do more of. So I suppose, like you said, it is really about the practical implementation of that. And so we have some of our organizations that are actively working on those. And again, they have that ability to sign up to our collaboration group as well, because it is about momentum, right? It's not a tick the box like as you say, Paddy, it is about kind of just continuing on this journey and making sure that it is a cultural transformation. It's not just a change initiative where they're throwing it over the fence. And actually, the really interesting piece about it is that it's a lot of the transformation leads and the OpEx leads that are really taking a lot of this on and translating that for what their organizations are. And so, no, we have, obviously it's a where do we start conversation, but it very much moves into, well, here's some of the things that you could do now. Here's the things that maybe might be more of a long-term play, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, it's been a really interesting journey for us.
Sarah, just conscious of time, but one last question for me is, rolling the clock forward 3 years, where would you like to be and what would you like to see have happened?
So I suppose it is, number one, that we're continuing to work on challenges that actually matter to manufacturing, that we can never lose sight of that. So it has to be challenges that actually will make a difference within manufacturing. So we want to make sure that we're continuing to move the dial on some of those things, and that some of the ideas that we have come up with within our 12 emerging themes, that we're really starting to see organizations bring some of those true to fruition, and that we can actually help other organizations to do that adoption as well. But I suppose it's quite simply, it's just never to be sitting still with it, to continue to do the right research within the right areas as well, so that we can continue to solution in the right way for our orgs.
Yeah, and I think those 12 emergent teams are very, very interesting. Anyone listening here, I'd really suggest you have a look at them. There's, I think, they're all about actually shining a light on new things, and I think that's why it's a very interesting report, because each of them, you might say, is small, even though I think each of them is quite substantial, but actually all of those together can have massive impacts on manufacturing. I think there's, obviously it's a very exciting time in manufacturing as well as to where it goes. We also have maybe a lot are questions about, will a lot of manufacturers return manufacturing to their own shores, and where Ireland Inc. can play a role in that. And of course, some would also argue, Sarah, that Industry 4.0, 5.0 opens the door to actually companies bringing manufacturing back closer to home again, because you're less dependent on, maybe in a funny way, on human resources in certain territories. So I don't know if you have a final comment on that, and we'll hand back to Tony then maybe to wrap it up.
I think we're a long way from that, and I do think that our people still are our number one resource, and as we continue to develop, we need to continue putting them at the center of it.
Well, Sarah, yeah, Sarah, excellent. You're on LinkedIn. So anyone wants to reach out to you, they'll find you on LinkedIn. Sarah, thank you. It's been wonderful. It's a great report, and it's great to get in behind it. So I want to thank you. I want to thank our audience. I want to thank the Digital Transformation Lab, and also Cork University Business School for all their support. So, Sarah, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Sarah.